Welcome to episode 18 of the Astrology with Heart podcast. Today we are mainly going to be talking about Gemini and the new moon coming up in Gemini on the 15th of June at 3:53 p.m. GMT, and that will happen at 24 degrees and 2 minutes. So I'm based in the United Kingdom. Please do adjust times and dates for your location wherever you are in the world. If you do have a natal chart to hand, please have it with you. It's always hugely helpful as I'm talking, so you get a sense of where everything is happening and how it might impact on you on your chart. I would like for you to play very special attention to roughly 20 to 28 degrees of the immutable signs. So that would be a conjunction in Gemini, an opposition in Sagittarius, and square to Cancer and Capricorn. Okay, let's jump in. So, new moon in Gemini. And when you look at the chart immediately, it doesn't look too horrific. However, we do have a square to Chiron in Aries. It's been in Aries for quite some time, and it's now going to square it at the 29th degree, which we call the anaretic degree. And what that means is it's the final degree before it moves into its new sign. So it tends to hold kind of the fullness of the archetype. So this is the highest amount of intensity of Aries. So a very strongly Chiron in Aries. And I've spoke before in my blog post and in my videos of Chiron in Aries in its relationship to kind of the internal I am, the sense of identity, our connection to courage, to initiating, to acting on instinct. So Aries, Mars, it's the sign of action. But it's instinctive action, and it's kind of innocent action in that it doesn't tend to run it through kind of a mental filter or consider the gravity of a situation. It just reacts. We also have ruler Mercury in a conjunction to Jupiter. So I'm going to be talking about those in a moment, but first of all, I want to dive a little bit into understanding Gemini. So Gemini is ruled by Mercury. It's one of the two signs ruled by Mercury. And Gemini is the kind of outward masculine side of Mercury. And as you can imagine, with ruler Mercury, Gemini energy is quite mental. Not mental, crazy, mental. So the emphasis is on data information. So actively looking for information and absorbing information. And that information can happen from kind of really any source, whether it's from thinking about things, extracting information online, in books, on programs, within conversations. Gemini is a fantastic energy in the social realm. It's I have a lot of friends that are Gemini suns, and I notice them like little butterflies. They kind of jump from group to group, and they're so adaptable. It's a mutable sign that they tend to just fit, and they know exactly how to be in any of these groups. It's like they just alter themselves a little bit for them. They're always great conversationists. And if you're somebody that loves talking about different subjects, Gemini are brilliant for stimulating the mind. It's also a sign that relates to curiosity, and I think that's a great kind of starting point. So I'm curious about something, and then Gemini will kind of explore it and find all this information that fulfills its curious nature. So as a very mentally curious and stimulating energy, as you can imagine, Gemini is brilliant at the art of conversation. Not just conversation, but is quite artful in terms of wordplay, and usually has quite a strong knack for languages. So very much about the spoken word and the written word. This is a sign that needs a lot of movement. It's a very restless sign. It can be quite happy independently, reading and ingesting information. Also very, very strong in terms of kind of social interaction and exchanges of interaction. You'll also find this sign is brilliant at any kind of mental games like quizzes and word games. If you're familiar with the symbolism of Gemini, it's known as the sign of the twins. And that gives it a very dualistic view. But I think it's a bit more multiplicity as opposed to dualistic. I mean, one of the great strengths of Gemini is this ability to be able to research and read and understand things from so many different angles, and also in conversation to kind of celebrate a number of perspectives. What you will find is there can be a bit of a gravitation to one side and then a gravitation to another, and then they're kind of fickle, and then they keep moving around a little bit. It's a mutable sign. It's a very openly curious and a changeable sign. It doesn't have that kind of fixed, this is what I'm thinking, and this is what I believe, and this is what I'm saying. It does tend to adjust quite a lot. But adaptability, flexibility, fluidity, and understanding of perspectives and different sides of things, that's definitely Gemini's strength. Also opening with curiosity. So, if we approach something with a sense of fear, that can really limit us. But Gemini has this natural, I wonder about this, and it asks lots of questions. There's lots of questions with Gemini. So let's talk a little bit about the shadow expression of Gemini. So as you can imagine, being a sign that's linked to the mind and mental processes, Gemini's curiosity can lead to overwhelm, overthinking, a need to constantly research and ask questions, and never quite feel fulfilled or satisfied. There's always more questions and always things to know. This can create a lot of anxiety in the body. It can also have a tendency to overthink things. So whereas some of the other signs might be more about the emotional side of things and the feelings that we have, especially at somatic level, Gemini tends to take that and funnel it through the mind. So it asks a lot of questions of the feelings, but doesn't always remain kind of in the body and just be with them. There can be a tendency to jump in kind of a shallow fashion from one topic to another, limiting the kind of depth that can take place. That restlessness can move one to the other. You might find in conversation that there's no kind of steady progressive depth in it. It just tends to switch and change, which can be a little bit frustrating. There can also be what I call the theorist approach. So I can think about things, and I can think about things for quite a while, but when it comes to action, I don't take it. There is obviously a requirement in life that, we have to kind of take action and then kind of pull things back into the thinking realm. But Gemini can kind of think and talk about things a lot more than it actually does them. There can be a tendency for inconsistency, mainly between this kind of shuffling and movement from one thing to another, and not quite having the integrity to attach and kind of ground a viewpoint. There can be a lot of intentions that don't have any backing behind them. With Gemini's link, as Mercury rules the nervous system along with Aquarius, it can really kind of jangle the nerves. I mean, this feeling of being mentally switched on all the time. I have to think about doing this, I have to think about doing that, I have to plan there, I have to go here, logging times and tasks and everything. It can be quite anxiety inducing. And so there can be overwhelm in the body, a lot of overwhelm and overheating in the mind. It can also be overwhelmed by the fact that there are so many pieces of information. And if you think about it, we're very much in an information age. At the touch of a button, we can find whatever we want. If we go into AI, we can just ask question after question after question and gain a lot more information. And that's wonderful. But when it comes to information, there kind of needs to be a movement from the information we're taking into this kind of discernment and to where we are very intentional with what we want to locate. So seeking and finding, and a sense of meaningfulness in that information, which is the Sagittarius side. So I think, you know, kind of a little bit of the dark side of Gemini is getting involved in the find, dig, but not allowing that information to move through to the next set of stages to fully assimilate and digest and contemplate and plan, and then move towards the kind of the actionable piece. So kind of getting a little sticky in the finding and the researching, because data is fantastic, but there has to be a movement. Now, I tend to work, for some reason, with a lot of clients that are very, very Gemini. In fact, I've worked with 4 Gemini suns, and there's a lot of crossover. There's definitely a real enthusiasm about knowing things. Enthusiasm about there's a million different things we could do. We could do it this way, we could do it that way, we could do it the other way. What about this idea? Do you like that idea? And I go, yes, this is all wonderful. And now my head is starting to spin. And I'm very Virgo. I have my Mars in Virgo in the 8th even, so it's intensified. And so I kind of say, look, have your openness. You need that adaptability. You need to be able to come up with flourishing ideas and look at all the different sides of things. I get that. Do a bit of a brain dump, right? Use that process, because everyone has their strengths. Take that and dump it down on the paper. And then we kind of go through it with a bit of a finer tooth comb, looking at, you know, this next step that I was talking about before, of where we start to get a little bit more discerning and a little bit more intentional. And then, you know, I link it with objectives and then move it forward to an actionable point, right? So there can be such an overwhelm of information that it does get a little bit head spinning. But it's workable. Everything is workable. The last one I want to mention is what I call the Jekyll and Hyde, where we kind of swing a little bit between these extremes. Again, with a lot of the Gemini people I've known, they can tend to be, this is one way today, and then the next day it's kind of the opposite. And so it can take a lot to align yourself with where they're at in any given moment. As I say, every energy has its strengths and every energy has its challenges. And I think with the Jekyll and Hyde, it's a bit of the whiplash that you get with kind of keeping up with where they could be at any particular time, and they could go back the other way. So I think what's really, really helpful with kind of Gemini energy in general is to apply the Virgo side of discernment, the Virgo side of analysis, to really develop all that information. Also leaning into pausing, actually taking yourself out of information highways, right? Taking yourself, having an internet break, having a social media break. Oh my gosh, that's one I forgot. Love of social media. You know, all that kind of flashy, sparky, switched on. So actively kind of pulling yourself back and saying, do you know what? I have taken in a lot of information. I think I'm good. And I think, you know, I'm going to shut this off for a bit and give my brain a chance to calm itself down, and my nervous system with that. Yeah, so get some of that kind of Virgo in there, get discerning, get intentional, get analytical, and also look at applying the opposite sign, which is always hugely important, right? And I would urge anyone that has kind of planets and points in one side to look at what is 180 degrees opposite, and this will give you some kind of balance. And the balancing point with Gemini is looking at Sagittarius. So it's looking at, okay, I have this information, I have this knowledge, but where am I going to take it forward? So let's take a look here at ruler. The ruler of this new moon. The ruler of this new moon is Mercury. It's in the sign of Cancer. And it is in a conjunction, so it's very close to Jupiter, which Jupiter is also in a conjunction with Venus in the next sign of Leo. Okay, so the Venus isn't in a conjunction to Mercury, but Jupiter is, and so they kind of have a little bit of a, what do you call it, well, a knock-on effect. So Mercury in Cancer, Jupiter in Cancer. This is what I call the big bear hug, which is the name of the blog post that associates with this new moon. And Mercury in Cancer, well, this is kind of going to give us an idea of what we are thinking about right now. And bearing in mind that Jupiter, being the largest planet, tends to expand everything. And so it's going to make what we're thinking about in Cancer far, far bigger and far more significant. So Cancer energy in general is our home. It's also our inner foundation, our emotional, psychological foundation. It's our family, our clan, our group. It's how we bond. It's our mothering tendencies, how we soothe, how we care, our emotional base, the feelings in our body, somatics, and attachment. When I talk about home, I talk about, our inner home, but also our physical home, where we feel most at home, the people that we feel at home with, the people that we can share that private side of ourselves with. So it's big bear hug, big mother bear kind of energy. And with Mercury, it shows what we're thinking about. So we're planting seeds, yes, definitely in Gemini, but with ruler Mercury here, we're planting seeds in something to do with Cancer energy. Now that could be that we're a lot more thoughtful on our emotions and what we want emotionally, maybe what our needs are right now. Maybe we're focused more on our home life, our private life, anything to do with our family connections, family time. We could also be feeling with Cancer a little bit more sensitive than usual. Jupiter can really ramp that up. We might be feeling like we want a bit of, I call this the chicken soup, looking for more warmth, more care, and more comfort, the kind of curling up on the couch with a cuddly blanket and a big bowl of ice cream. So, we might be thinking of what our comfort needs are, what our private needs are, what our emotional needs are, and who gets to be a part of our most personal, vulnerable, and sensitive selves. We might be having a lot of conversations around emotions, sharing our emotions, where we feel most sensitive, where we feel most vulnerable, having very vulnerable conversations, or even very literally, like at the moment, I'm selling one home and we'll be looking to buy another. And as it happens, one of my best friends is also looking to buy a home. And so we're having a lot of conversations and really kind of gearing each other up, because we both had a tough time the last few years, about, how we feel about buying a home and what we visualize that home to look like, and even the, short journeys or the short travel that's very Gemini. You know, should we travel together? Should we go and look at houses together? Which is really, really lovely. Also, like linking back to kind of Gemini's curiosity, you know, opening ourselves up to a sense of curiosity, maybe curiosity about our emotions and about our needs, you know, and I think that can kind of peeling back the layers of where it might be sensitive and just kind of embracing that curiosity within that, which allows us to explore a lot more and ask a lot more questions of ourselves and what our needs are. Possibilities and choice is very Gemini. And we always have choices. Even when we do feel that we have no choice and when we're backed into corners, we always do make our choices. And I think it's very important to know that we do have them and that we can sit and think about them before we take action. We could find that our thoughts and emotions have a really nice flow at this time. We could feel the expansive nature of those in that conjunction to Jupiter. Jupiter is a real kind of good, fortunate and quite joyful energy of itself. So we could be feeling less of that kind of exposing vulnerability and more of that opening ourselves up with curiosity, really expanding those parts of ourselves, and gaining a lot of kind of support from family or those that we have created as a family. You know, I see a lot of my friends as my family. I've known them so long. Apologies, because I think I mentioned that Chiron was a square aspect to the new moon. It's not in square, it's actually in a sextile. But I think the fact that it's at 29 degrees is going to make it feel probably like it is more like a square. So that 29th degrees shows us that there is something that is extremely painful at this point in time, and it's at the point where it feels like we kind of are extremely sensitive to it, or we can't quite bear it anymore. With the sextile, that means that, well, we have an opportunity. If we put in a little bit of action, we can start to soothe or ease that pain point. So if you do have your natal chart there, really just take a look at where 29 degrees of Aries is. That's where Chiron will be at this new moon, and that might be a point of pain that you have an opportunity to work on. So when we talk about the sign of Aries, we're talking about the kind of big I am energy, the part of ourselves that wants to act on instinct, that wants the freedom to follow its desires, that sorry, that's my cat falling on the roof, lovely. That is about want, where we want to move, where we want to activate, initiate, where we feel courage, where we want to fight, or even like integrally, where we have the right to exist, the point of identity. So Aries being the first energy is like our first kind of birth into the world, right? So it's, you know, do I have the right to be here? Do I have the right to exist? Do I have the right to go after what I want? Can I be who I am? Can I embody that? So it's kind of a really big energy right now. And playing into that new moon, I think we're going to see a lot of questions around that. And as I say, you know, one of those strength points of Gemini is its real openness to curiosity. And if you can initiate this, even when it's feeling quite tender and quite sensitive, of, you know, I want to explore this in a very curious and open way, I think that could be quite soothing. We do have to bear in mind with both Mercury and Jupiter expanding in Cancer that, you know, emotions are going to be probably a bit bigger than they would normally be too. That's going to ramp up some of that sensitivity. And whenever we have a planet or point or asteroid at the 29th degree, it kind of feels like it's going to happen. Do you know what I mean? we don't have the luxury of the extra degrees where we can kind of and and decide if it's something that we want to work with. We kind of do have to work with something when it reaches that 29th degree. And I almost see this one, and I usually get a really strong visual of like you've been out running the bullies at school for quite some time, and today the bullies have caught up with you and they pinned you to the wall, and you now have to fight your corner like you do. You have to kind of just own it and box them in the face. You can't outrun it at this point. But as I say, that sextile says there's opportunity, right? So just pulled the chart there on screen. If you're watching from video, if you're watching on the podcast, please do click on the blog post and you'll see the chart for the new moon there. So we've got Pluto retrograding at 5 degrees of Aquarius. It's in an opposition to Venus at 1 degree of Leo. Venus happens to be in a conjunction with Jupiter in Cancer, which is in a conjunction itself with Mercury in Cancer, the ruler of this new moon. So there's kind of a lot feeding into each other. So let's break this one down a little bit because there's quite a lot going on. So Pluto in Aquarius retrograde. So whenever we see a planet in retrograde, it causes us to kind of go backwards and inwards. And so it's less about what we experience within the world and more about what we experience within ourselves. Pluto in an energy is going to look at what needs to die and what needs to transform. It's also going to impact on what our unconscious fears are. And so we kind of get to sit in a little bit of the black space with Pluto. Sorry. I call it back to black. Thank you, Amy Winehouse. And being in Aquarius, so whatever is going to come to light internally is likely to come in erratic, sudden kind of downloads rather than it be a continuous process. So I think over the 5 or so months that Pluto is retrograding, we could have these very kind of insightful, as they kind of out of the blue, shifts and understandings of ourselves. Aquarius also gives us the ability to almost separate a little bit, because Pluto itself is a fixed sign, an emotional sign, and so Aquarius gives us just that little kind of almost protection, really, to take us out of ourselves as well, in order to observe it. And then with this opposition to Venus in Leo, Venus being really about how we relate, relationships, partnerships, values, finances, and Leo being about at the act of self-creation, self-actualization, our inner fire, our inner passion, and creating from the heart. I think there's going to be kind of key considerations about maybe our kind of own internal blocks or internal shadow that is inhibiting us from being able to create really kind of from the heart and not the head. What kind of internal blocks, what internal fears do we have that are causing us to not meet another and recognize and embody our values from our hearts? So it can be a little cut off from our hearts. I think that's going to be kind of a bit forced into this equation. The retrograde is going to continue, but I think Aquarius itself is going to bring that in, those kind of, as I said, like those download moments where we're going to kind of get an idea of where we're not meeting ourselves from the heart. And maybe where we're not initiating from a point of passion, like what we're really passionate about, what we really feel. So I'm going to end, as I usually do, with a few questions and a ritual. There are many more, there are many more questions, and there are a few more rituals on the blog post. You'll find the links below. So I'm going to pick out a couple here. What should I go with? Oh, this one's nice. Which ideas genuinely excite me and which simply distract me? I think that's kind of pulling on some of the strengths and weaknesses here of Gemini, because, you know, the doomsday scrolling I see as the distraction, especially with social media. So yeah, which ideas genuinely excite me and which are just a distraction? How can I communicate my needs with more clarity and honesty? What conversations do I need to initiate to move forward right now? And I've got one ritual here which I just really loved it when I read it. It's called Writing a New Narrative, and Gemini is very much the storyteller. And so this ritual is about choosing one area of your life, and as I say, if you've got your natal chart handled, choosing the area of life where this new moon is happening right now could be particularly valuable to you. Maybe looking at where your life story is feeling kind of old or tired or a bit limiting, and rewriting it in a present tense as if the new version is already true. This actually links to something I was reading not so long ago about when you want to manifest something in the world, acting as if it's already happened. It takes a little bit to get your head around because your body kind of knows that it hasn't, but rewriting your story in the present tense as if the new version is already true. A little bit of trickery, and Mercury is the trickster, so this is a good one. So plenty more of those on the blog if you want to try those out. Thank you so much for listening. Please do like, review, follow. You can also join me on Instagram or TikTok. All of the links are below. Just a note that I won't be doing the next full moon podcast because I will actually be sailing the seas, but I will be back after that.